You can now support Ghost Maps on Patreon. Simply look for We Are HANTU or click the link in the description. Ghost Maps, entry 110, Kampong Sireh, Singapore. Betty has the third eye. That means she has the ability to see ghosts and spirits. Prior to tonight, I thought it was an ability that I didn't have. Yes, I've seen creatures from beyond the veil of the ordinary, and even some ghosts, but those were rare exceptions. People who actually have the third eye walk through life seeing spirits all the time. It's easy for someone like Betty to assume that not everyone else can see what she's seeing. It took me a while to tell the difference between a ghost and, say, a creature like the... At this point, she drops her voice down to a whisper. Like the Pontianak. It's this confusion that's at the heart of Betty's next story, her second for tonight. As another round of drinks arrives for us, I switch my recorder back on and ask her to start from the beginning. It was 1996. Betty's father had passed on 5 years before. He had been her best friend for her whole life, partly because he was the parent she was slightly closer to, she admits sheepishly, but also because they shared the gift of the third eye. Ever since his passing, she felt more alone than ever before. She kept up appearances, remaining the same outgoing teenager that people knew her as before her father's passing. But now, whenever she saw spirits while she was in class or hanging out with friends on Orchard Road, she didn't have anyone she could talk to about it. When she turned 15, she started dating a guy named Josh. He was, as she described, as competent a boyfriend as most teenage boys are, even though he was 2 years older than her. The pair spent a lot of their free time hanging out with Josh's friends at a coffee shop along Upper Serangoon Road. The group would meet there for dinner and stay later if the coffee shop was screening an English football match. After which, Betty and Josh usually walked back to his place, just off Lorong Asu, where she would spend the night. Sometimes they would be accompanied by a couple of his friends who also stayed nearby. On this particular night, there were 4 of them: Betty, Josh, and his friends Alex and Jonathan. The walk took them through Surin Avenue, then down a slope called Kampong Sireh. Surin Avenue was always so creepy, Betty tells me. I never saw any spirits there, but that just made me feel worse. Like, what was so bad that even ghosts stayed away, you know? The avenue in question was lined with old, tall trees that obscured the streetlights. The trees also formed a canopy that didn't allow much, if any, moonlight in. It was around 3 a.m. and a match had just ended. Josh's favorite team had lost, which only soured his mood even more. We had been fighting that afternoon over God knows what, Betty says, rolling her eyes. We fought a lot then. All of that made the usually short walk back feel so much longer. The tension between Betty and Josh was palpable. Jonathan and Alex didn't seem to notice though, and yapped loudly as they walked ahead. In that moment, Betty felt gripped by the same loneliness she had been feeling on and off ever since her father passed. The sense that no matter how many people, living or dead, surrounded her, she was really all on her own. And that's when she heard the rustling in the leaves of the tree beside her. She brushed it off at first, probably just the wind, even though she didn't feel a breeze, and even though the rest of the trees seemed completely still. Josh didn't hear it, which could have meant a lot of things. He wasn't observant at the best of times, let alone when he was upset with both his girlfriend and his favorite team. But this felt different to Betty. They turned off Surin Avenue onto Kampong Sireh, and that rustling followed them. She was about to look up when Josh suddenly hissed, more to himself than to her. What was that? Weirdly enough, that made Betty feel relieved. Whatever it was, couldn't have been a ghost. I figured if he was aware of it, then it wasn't supernatural at all, Betty says. Back then, I thought that people with a third eye were the only ones who could sense and see spirits and other things. But Josh, like most people, could see those other things. And this one was a white shape moving from tree to tree, following them. Josh screamed for Jonathan and Alex to run as he grabbed Betty's hand and dashed down the slope. His friends seemed clueless about what was going on. Even Betty was taken by surprise, nearly tripping as she tried to keep up. She managed to get one look back over her shoulder though, as they sped down. And that's when she saw it clearly. A woman in a plain white dress with long black hair crouch on one of the tall tree's branches. She was glaring hungrily in Betty's direction. But, Betty says, quietly, almost warmly, she wasn't glaring at me. She turned back and continued running. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear, even as the rustling in the trees grew louder and louder. The woman was closer now, and she wasn't alone. This story would have ended a whole lot differently if there wasn't a temple at the end of Kampong Sireh, Betty says. The leaves were still rustling, but whatever was hidden within them didn't advance any further. She could tell, however, that they were angry. Josh and his friends didn't notice though. They continued running until they were all safely in Josh's parents' flat. We all took that evening as a sign, Betty says. And Josh took it as a sign to wear a blessed crucifix around his neck. Still, he stayed away from Kampong Sireh for a while. Betty, on the other hand, took it as a different sign. I'm not going to pretend that the Pontianak was watching over me, she says with a laugh. But her eyeing Josh as prey instead of me made me feel less lonely, if that makes any sense. I tell her that it doesn't have to make sense. She nods in agreement. After that, I looked at my third eye as something that kept my dad alive in my heart, she says. And I made sure to treat it with the respect and care that my father would have wanted me to. Which, she adds with a smile, leads me to my last story of the night. I tell her that we can get started on that after we get more drinks. As I turn to wave the drink stall auntie over, however, I notice that the coffee shop's more crowded than it was before. My expression changes slightly, and Betty picks up on it. You see them too, right? She says. I wasn't sure before, but now I know. You have the third eye too. How come you didn't tell me earlier? I turn back to her and smile apologetically. Then I tell her it's a little bit complicated. I add that for now though, let's keep the focus on her stories instead. If you want to discover more of Southeast Asia's other side, subscribe now and follow us on social media. You can also be one of our supporters on Patreon. Look for We Are HANTU or click the links in the description. Ghost Maps is a HANTU production created by Kyle Ong and Wayne Ray, with art direction by Jolene Lim, and recorded on Audio Technica mics.